Hello, and thank you for choosing this full-length, clean, historical Western romance by Kat Lynn. We are so happy to have you with us today. Before we begin, don't forget to tap the subscribe button and like and share with your friends. Your support allows us to continue sharing these sweet, heartwarming stories for free. Now, relax and get ready to travel back in time to the American frontier, where we join an adventure to find love and happily ever after. Enjoy. Copyright of Kat Lynn. Wagon Train, Brides Number 7, Daisy by Kat Lynn, Chapter 1, Kansas City, Missouri, 1880. I'm leaving now, Papa. I'll see you in the evening, Daisy cheerfully told her father as she placed a quick kiss on his weathered cheek. All right, my dear, John Cobb answered his daughter. It had been the two of them since he could remember, and since his unfortunate accident 5 years ago, this had been their usual routine every morning. Daisy closed his father's bedroom door and hurried through the narrow hallway to the front door. She made sure she locked it securely behind her before walking out to the street towards Mrs. Jones' house. She wondered what mood the elderly woman would be in that day and hoped for the best. She clearly remembered the night she'd received the news of her father's accident at his workplace. She had been only 15 years old, naive to the ways of the world and fully dependent on him. It had shattered her heart even further when the doctor informed her that he would never walk again. What were they going to do? She'd wondered as tears ran down her cheeks. Her father would never work again, and she neither had a job nor knew where she could find one. I don't know what we're going to do, Daisy, her father said one evening, a few days after he'd left the hospital. I'm going to find a job, Papa. Don't worry, Daisy had instantly answered. She then walked closer to her father and took his limp hand in hers. And what will you do? You're just a child, John had stated, his weary voice full of pain and hopelessness. I'm no longer a child, Papa. I'm 15 years old, Daisy answered with so much conviction that her father had smiled through his despair. Oh, my child, you remind me so much of your late mother, John answered as he looked his daughter in the eyes. She had the same fire in her eyes, just like her late mother had. I wish I had met her, Daisy said, her voice sad. You'd have loved her. She was such a gracious woman, and she loved you very much, John answered. He could see that his statement had brought some comfort to his daughter. The following morning after breakfast, Daisy told her father that she was going out to look for a job. He knew that trying to persuade her otherwise would be futile, and he had wished her well as she ran out of the house. Later that evening, Daisy came back home and told her father that she'd found a job as a domestic worker at Mrs. Jones's house. The Jones family was one of the wealthiest in their town, but Mrs. Jones had a reputation for mistreating her workers. John had wanted to tell his daughter about her future employer, but he'd bitten his tongue instead. Now, as Daisy hurried to her workplace, she remembered how much she had begged the mean lady for the job. She knew it was her turn to take care of her father just like he had done since she was a child. Daisy could tell that it wasn't going to be a walk in the park working for Mrs. Jones, but she didn't have any other choice. 5 years on, she was still working there, even though each day was proving to be more difficult than the other. I wish you'd come in a few minutes earlier each day, Daisy. Do you realize how much work awaits you every morning? Mrs. Jones scoffed at the poor girl as she walked in through the servants' entrance. I'm sorry, Mrs. Jones, Daisy answered, her head bowed. Don't just stand there. Hurry up and change into your uniform, the older lady barked, her nose in the air. Okay, Mrs. Jones, Daisy answered as she scurried away. One day I'm going to leave this job and I will never come back, she swore under her breath. The rest of the day was no better for Daisy, as she was made to clean several spots twice or thrice. She wished she could quit her job, but she knew that she needed the money for food, rent, and many other needs. She had gone looking for a job at a local cafe, but the money was far less and wouldn't be enough for her expenses. Dejected, she decided to continue working for Mrs. Jones. That night, as she went to feed her father, he noticed how sad and worn out she looked. As usual, she was trying to put on a brave face, but he could tell that she was troubled. What's wrong, my child? He asked. Nothing, Papa. I'm just worn out, she answered, avoiding his gaze. You know you can tell me anything, my child, he prodded. Finally, the weight of the hurt she had been carrying for all this time came crashing down, and she laid her head on her father's immobile chest and wept. John hated that he couldn't even lay a comforting hand on his daughter's shoulders. He felt useless as he waited helplessly for her to regain control. She's so horrible to me, Papa. Nothing I ever do is good enough for her, she said after she'd calmed down. No, child, she's just a mean old woman. If you weren't that important to her, she wouldn't have kept you working for her for 5 years, he explained, and Daisy's face immediately lit up. You think so, Papa? She asked, her eyes now shining. It lifted her spirits every time her father paid her a compliment. I know so, my child, John reassured her. He had known that this was bound to happen from the first time she'd told him that she was working for the Joneses. Only now did he realize how much she must have suffered in silence, and it broke his heart. Had the company I worked for so tirelessly and for so many years agreed to pay for the accident, we wouldn't be in this dilemma, John said. He had tried all these years to plead with his former employer to compensate him, but all his pleas had fallen on deaf ears. Don't worry, Papa. I'll continue working at Mrs. Jones. It's okay. Don't worry yourself too much about it, Daisy said as she laid her head back on her father's chest. Her growing dislike for the well-to-do was increasing with each passing day. She couldn't believe how heartless they all were. Chapter 2. Brownsville, Nebraska, 1880. Albert watched as his longtime employee and friend, Bethany Lake, wrapped up a loaf of bread for yet another satisfied customer, and he couldn't have been any happier. His business was doing great, better than it had in years. The bakery had been his father's, and when the old man died, Albert was 22 years old, and he had taken over the business as had been his father's wish. But he had almost lost everything 2 years ago from a broken heart. He'd been about to get married to his fiancée, Rose Watkins, but on the morning of the wedding, Rose had run off without as much as an explanation to him. The pain and the humiliation from being left at the altar had almost driven him to ruin. He'd turned to the bottle, and had it not been for the kindness of his loyal worker Bethany, he would have lost everything. She had been with him as he fought to regain his confidence and respect among the townsfolk, who always had something to say behind his back. He counted himself as one of the luckiest people to have someone like Bethany by his side. 2 years later, he was feeling confident again to give love another chance. The problem was he had no wish to marry a local lady. He had grown up with Rose and had thought that she loved him just as much as he loved her. He had been awfully shocked then when she'd up and left him on the morning of their wedding. Even though the pain had somewhat subsided with time, it still hurt when he thought about her. The only way to forget her, he felt, was to fall in love again, but he didn't know with whom. I have a feeling that this year is going to be the best yet, Albert told Bethany, who stood idling by the front counter after the last customer had left. I feel the same way too. Our clientele has increased, and we are selling more than we have ever before, Bethany answered, her full attention now on her boss and friend. I see that too. I'm afraid you might soon be overwhelmed with work. Should you feel that way, let me know, and I will hire someone else to help you, he said, and she smiled. There is no need, Albert. I can handle everything by myself just fine. But should I need help, I'll be sure to let you know, she replied. Okay, Bethany, whatever you say, he answered. This was another reason why he appreciated having her working for him. She was never fussy, and she took everything in her stride. He could never have asked for more. Albert unlocked his front door to be greeted by silence and total darkness. He fumbled around blindly until he found a lantern and lit it. As he walked down the hallway towards the drawing room, he couldn't help but imagine how different life would have been had his marriage to Rose gone through. They would have had children by now, he had no doubt. He could imagine them happily running to welcome him home every time he arrived from work. But now it was the exact opposite. The house was cold and quiet. He'd found himself many times wanting to spend the night at the bakery instead of coming to this shell of a house. He went into the kitchen and placed the bread he'd brought with him on top of the kitchen table. He walked over to the range and saw that there was stew in the pot remaining from last night. He would heat that up later on and eat it with the bread he'd brought with him. Feeling exhausted, he went to the drawing room to rest for a bit before he ate his dinner. As he sank onto his couch, something caught the corner of his eye, and when he looked closely, he saw that it was the newspaper he'd bought the day before, but had never gotten around to reading it. He picked it up and started flipping through the pages until one caught his attention. It was lined from top to bottom with numerous ads from gentlemen out west searching for brides to marry from the east. He knew of a few couples who'd got married this way, but it wasn't something he'd ever considered. He was shocked to realize that the service known as the mail-order bride service was this popular. As much as it seemed popular, was it really a good idea to marry someone you've never physically met? He wondered. What if the person wasn't what they'd portrayed themselves to be in real life? Many negative thoughts ran through his mind, but at the same time, something seemed to be pulling him toward the idea. The same thoughts ran through his mind as he ate his dinner, and as much as he tried to brush them away, they kept lingering back long after he'd gone to bed. He thought about Rose. She was a local girl, and he'd known her since their early childhood. Nothing in their interactions could have led him to think that she would disappoint him as she had. Maybe it wouldn't do any harm to try the mail-order bride service and see what comes out of it. There must have been a reason why so many folks out west chose to go that route. He would soon be turning 33 years old, and he still had no child. Who would carry on with his legacy once he was gone? His father had passed the bakery on to him when he died, and Albert wished to do the same when his time came. For that to become a reality, he would have to get married first and then have children. Suddenly, the idea didn't sound so bad after all, and he promised himself to give it more thought when he woke up the following morning. Chapter 3. Since their candid talk a few days ago, Daisy noticed that her father's health was slowly declining, even though he didn't seem to be in pain. She would try to question him about it, but he would carefully mask everything, blaming it on his advanced age. Each morning when Daisy left the house, she would worry that she wouldn't find him alive when she came back in the evening. Disturbing thoughts would plague her the whole day, and she worried that soon her work would be affected. She would think about what her father had said about the company that he'd worked for prior to his accident. Since he'd been injured on their premises, they had promised to compensate him, but they had gone back on their word. John was too sick to go after them, and he had exhausted all his savings on his treatment. Daisy wouldn't have known where to start either. Feeling that the odds were against them, her father had finally given up. It tore Daisy's heart to pieces that the company had decided to throw them under the bus without a care in the world. "Papa, maybe we should try going after your former employer once more," Daisy said one evening as she sat on the edge of her father's bed, patiently feeding him. "How do we do that, Daisy? I can hardly swat a fly away from my face." John snapped to Daisy's shock. It was the first time she was seeing him that way, and it shook her to the core. "I'm sorry, Papa. I didn't mean to upset you," she said softly as tears burned her eyes. "No, I'm the one who should be sorry, dear. I'm not angry at you. I'm just frustrated that for the past 5 years, I have only been a burden to you. Look at the awful woman you're working for. All the pain you're going through is because of me," he said, and Daisy could see tears shining in his eyes. "Don't say that, Papa. You've never been a burden to me. I'm happy that you're here with me," she answered, and placed the plate on the side table. She took his cold hand in hers and looked him in the eye. "I don't mind taking care of you, and I will never talk about your former job again. It breaks my heart every time you come back home tired and unhappy. I wish I could get up, go out to work, and be a father to you. But look at me," he said as he motioned down to his immobile body with his eyes. Overwhelmed with emotions, Daisy only held her father tighter as she thought about what he'd said. It had never occurred to her that he suffered so much on her behalf. She swore to herself that from then on, she would stop talking about the hardships she faced at Mrs. Jones's. She was prepared to do anything as long as she shielded him from any form of pain. Her father was the only family she had, and she needed him around for as long as possible, regardless of his challenging health issues. "Have some more food, Papa," she said as she brought the spoon to his lips, but he shook his head. "I've had enough for today," he said. "But Papa, you need to eat a little more for your strength," Daisy pushed on. "I couldn't, child. Maybe tomorrow," he said and closed his eyes. "Okay, good night, Papa," Daisy said as she carefully wiped his mouth with a wet washcloth. "Good night, my child," John answered without opening his eyes, and Daisy could tell that he was exhausted. She blew out the lantern, slowly walked out of the room, and shut the door behind her. The following morning, as Daisy kissed her father goodbye, she could tell that he was in a better mood than the previous night. She ran out of the house and down the road, hoping to make it to Mrs. Jones's house earlier than the day before. Maybe then she wouldn't be shouted at. For some reason that she couldn't understand, the day felt longer, and she couldn't wait for it to end so she could rush home to check on her father. Later that evening, when she was finally able to leave, she hurried down the street toward her home, her heart unsettled. When she arrived home, Daisy unlocked the front door, and a sudden feeling of panic overcame her. The house felt unusually quiet as she made her way through the narrow hallway to her father's bedroom. He was lying peacefully under the covers, and she was surprised when his head didn't turn at the sound of the bedroom door opening as it had been the norm. The same feeling of overwhelming panic washed over her once more as she made her way closer to the bed. She got to the bed, saw that his eyes were closed, and she assumed that he was asleep. When she took his hand, however, it was colder than usual, and he still didn't open his eyes. "Papa?" she called, but still there was no movement. She reached out and touched his face. It was ice cold. It only took her a minute to realize what had happened, and she froze at the side of the bed. Her throat became so dry that when she tried to scream, no sound came out. What she dreaded the most all her life had happened. Her father was gone from her forever. She sank down to her knees and sobbed as she had never before at the realization that she was now alone in the world. Chapter 4. It didn't take Albert long to finally come to the decision that the mail order service was the best option for him. After doing his own research around Lincoln, he'd found out that all the couples that married using the service were very successful in their unions. This was what he wanted for himself, and he wasn't going to waste any more of his time pondering over it. He was going to post his ad and then see what comes out of it. With his stationery already spread out on his writing desk, he hesitated for just a second before he began jotting down on the white sheet of paper. A 32-year-old gentleman in Brownsville, Nebraska, seeks a young lady below 25 years of age for marriage and companionship. She should be kind-hearted, with strong maternal instincts, and be willing to relocate to Nebraska as soon as possible. He read and reread his ad until he was convinced that it sounded right and convincing. He opted to leave out what his occupation was, as he felt that putting it out there might attract the wrong kind of attention. He would discuss the finer details with the girl he chose to marry. That night, as he lay in his bed, he thought of what he was about to embark on. It was impossible to know what lay ahead for him, but he knew that he was ready. It had taken him 2 years to finally return to his normal self, and he wasn't going to waste any more time worrying about the unknown. "That will be all, Mr. Moss," the young man working at the postal exchange said. "Thank you, Jenkins. I will see you in a few weeks," Albert answered. "All the best, Mr. Moss," Jenkins said as he winked knowingly at Albert. He waved at Jenkins, and then he walked down the street to his bakery. Bethany smiled when Albert walked into the premises. She had noticed that for the past few days he'd been preoccupied with something, and she was itching to find out what it was. Her curiosity had been further roused when she'd seen him earlier in the day, walking towards the postal exchange, seemingly in deep thought. As far as she knew, Albert rarely visited the postal exchange as all his mail was delivered to the bakery by Jenkins himself. "I thought you weren't coming in today?" she started as Albert walked to his desk, pulled out his chair, and sat. "Did you need me for something?" he asked instead. He was still divided on whether he wanted Bethany to know what he planned on doing. He'd wanted to keep it a secret until the last minute, but at the same time, he felt bad having to keep Bethany in the dark. After all, they knew almost everything about each other. "No, not really. I just noticed that lately you haven't been yourself. I wondered whether something was the matter," she asked, her voice full of concern. "It's nothing, Bethany, though I've been struggling with a certain decision for some time. But I finally took care of it, and I feel like I've done the right thing," he answered, his eyes staring into the distance. "Anything I should worry about?" she pressed. She could sense that he was keeping a huge secret from her, and she couldn't wait to find out what it was. "You worry too much, Bethany. Like I said, it isn't much of a deal, and I'm handling it. With time, I will let you know all about it. Where is today's newspaper?" he asked abruptly, signaling the end of the conversation. As Bethany brought the newspaper to him, her mind was in turmoil. This was the first time that he didn't feel comfortable sharing his troubles with her, and she was worried that she was slowly losing her grip on him. She couldn't have that. Bethany Lake had arrived in Brownsville, Nebraska from New Orleans when she was only 16 years old, broken and dejected. She had grown up in a hostile orphanage environment where she had been both mentally and physically abused. And Prosh equals 7%. When the chance to leave that life behind had presented itself, there had been no looking back. She had no idea who her parents were, and she had stopped wondering a long time ago. Her first job in Brownsville was at a local cafe where she'd worked for 2 years. It was within that time that she'd got acquainted with Albert. He treated her with kindness, and after a short while, she'd developed deep feelings for him. But she could tell that he didn't feel the same way. He was 4 years older than her, and she felt that he treated her like a small sister instead of a fully grown woman. Undeterred, she'd held on to the friendship, hoping that one day he would reciprocate her feelings. When his father died and Albert took over the bakery business, she had persuaded him to give her a job there, and he had agreed. She felt that being close to him every day would get her closer to having her mission accomplished. She was hugely disappointed when he started dating a beautiful local girl named Rose Watkins. Bethany prayed that the relationship wouldn't lead to marriage, and she was horrified when 3 years into the relationship, Albert proposed to Rose and she accepted. She then vowed that the wedding wouldn't go through, and she'd hatched an evil plan that saw Rose running to the hills on the morning of her wedding, never to look back. Now, as Bethany watched Albert flip through the newspaper, she hoped that she wasn't going to have a surprise sprung up on her. She had nursed him back to health after his heartbreak 2 years ago, and she wasn't going to sit back and watch someone reap what she had sown. She had dedicated all her life to Albert's bakery, as well as to his well-being, and she deserved to have it all. She had no idea what was going on with him, but she was ready to deal with any situation that stood in the way of her long-term goal. Atrocity, 5. Daisy buried her beloved father at the local cemetery with only the undertaker present 3 days later. He stood away from her as she said her final goodbyes, and she might as well have been alone. Afterward, she'd walked home in a daze as she wondered what life had in store for her. She had no friends, and now the last of the family she'd ever known was gone. Kansas City no longer had anything to offer her. Mrs. Jones had allowed her to take a few days off to mourn her father, surprising Daisy. She'd always thought the old woman had a heart made of stone. Mrs. Jones had brought in another girl to take over Daisy's chores for the few days she would be away. The girl's name was Elizabeth Long, and she was from Independence, Missouri. That's all the information Daisy had about the new girl. To be honest, she couldn't care much about who she was. She wasn't even sure whether she would be going back to work for Mrs. Jones. Her father had been the reason she'd held on for so long, and now that he wasn't around, she had no reason to be there. The first night after the burial was the hardest for Daisy. All she did was think about her father and how he had suffered before his death. She was particularly angry with the company that had employed him. It infuriated her that he had worked there for so many years, but when he needed them the most, they had turned their backs on him. Prior to his untimely death, her father wasn't in any pain, and Daisy was now convinced that he had died from a broken heart. It was almost dawn when she finally fell asleep, and she had drifted into a restless slumber full of nightmares. 2 weeks passed, and Daisy was still at home, undecided on which path to take next with her life. She was becoming more convinced that the best option for her would be to move far away from Kansas City and leave all the bad memories behind. The only problem was that she didn't have enough money to enable that move. She now wished she had gone back to work for Mrs. Jones after her father's burial. She would have saved up again, enough to afford her move to another state. As she hadn't gone back to work on the time she had agreed upon with Mrs. Jones, she was sure that the lady wouldn't allow her to come back to work. The new girl had probably been offered Daisy's position already. She decided to fold up her father's old clothes and give them to the needy on the following day. She was so engrossed in what she was doing that she thought she'd heard a knock at the front door, but she wasn't sure. Listening carefully this time, she heard a sharp knock again, and she begrudgingly went to see who it was. "Good morning, Miss Cobb." A tall, thin man with a freckled face greeted her. She had no idea who he was. "Good morning," she answered, her guard already up. If he had been sent by the apartment's owner, she would swiftly let him know that she would be staying on for a bit longer. "I have been sent by Mrs. Jones. She needs to speak with you urgently," he said. "What does she need to see me for?" Daisy asked. She had no idea why the lady would want to see her. "I don't know, miss. Perhaps you should pay her a visit and find out for yourself," the young man advised to Daisy's amusement. "Yes, that sounds like a good idea. I will pay her a visit later on in the afternoon," she said. "I will let her know, miss," he said as he turned and walked away without another word. Daisy went back to folding her father's clothes away as she thought about the message she had received from the errand boy. She had no idea why Mrs. Jones would want to see her. She hoped to take that chance to let her know that she wouldn't be working for her anymore. Daisy took a deep breath, straightened the long skirts of her dress, and knocked at the door. Hing. The sooner she knew why she had been summoned to the house, the better. After a minute, the huge door swung open, and a young lady almost her age and with a pleasant face motioned for her to come in. "Miss Cobb?" she asked, smiling at Daisy. Her gentle smile warmed Daisy's heart, and she immediately felt at ease with her. "Yes, I'm Daisy Cobb," she answered, and found herself smiling back at the young lady. She could tell that this was the new girl from the uniform she was wearing. "I'm Elizabeth. Elizabeth Long. Come on in. Mrs. Jones is waiting for you in the drawing room," the new girl answered as she led Daisy down the hallway and into the drawing room. "Daisy, it's very nice to see you. How have you been?" Mrs. Jones said as she motioned for Daisy to have a seat. She was smiling from ear to ear, and Daisy was taken aback. Why was she being so nice to her? She wondered. "Thank you," Daisy murmured as she took her seat. "I bet you're wondering why I called you here," the older woman said, the smile never leaving her face. "Yes, ma'am, I'm a little confused," Daisy admitted. "Well, I see you've met Elizabeth," Mrs. Jones said, and Daisy nodded in agreement. "I would like you to come back and work for me. I want both you and Elizabeth to work for me." Daisy thought she hadn't heard her well. Was Mrs. Jones asking her to come back and work for her? She was lost for words as she let Mrs. Jones's words sink into her. Chapter 6. A week passed after Albert posted his ad, and it felt like a month to him. He would intentionally pass by the postal exchange hoping Jenkins had something for him. He knew that he needed to wait for at least 3 weeks, but he tried anyways. He busied himself at the bakery, but it seemed all he thought about was the ad and what would come of it. Many times he'd wanted to talk to Bethany about the issue, but he'd hesitated every time. "Albert?" Bethany said. "Huh?" He turned to her, and she could tell that his mind had been far away. I asked whether I should start preparing Mrs. Bennet's order now, or will tomorrow morning suffice? Bethany asked. It was beginning to annoy her that Albert was clearly going through some personal issue that he still refused to discuss with her. Oh, let's do it now. We don't want anything going wrong at the last minute, he answered, quickly snapping back to reality. I wish next time she would place her order early enough instead of rushing us at the last minute, Bethany retorted, much to Albert's surprise. Is something the matter, Bethany? He asked, turning to look at her in bewilderment. It was so unlike her to use that tone with him. I'm sorry, Albert. I didn't mean to lose my temper like that. It's been a busy week is all, she answered. If you're feeling overwhelmed, you can always let me know, and I will hire more help. I thought we'd talked about this already, Albert said. He didn't believe her answer, and he wished she'd be honest with him. There had been times in the past when the bakery had been wall-to-wall with customers, and not once did Bethany complain or break a sweat. Something else was going on here, and he didn't know how to help if she wouldn't talk to him. No, there's no need for that. I'll be okay, I promise. Bethany assured him and managed a tiny smile which further heightened his suspicions. Remember what I said. We can always hire more help if you say so, he said, and she nodded her agreement. That evening, as he sat on his couch with a cup of coffee, Albert pondered over the happenings of the day. Lately, he'd noticed that Bethany's demeanor had slowly changed. She would show displeasure whenever he was away from work for long periods of time. He had never needed to explain himself to her before. He, at times, felt as if she was overstepping her boundaries, but since she never actually said anything to him, he'd let it slide. After all, they'd known each other for a long time, and had there been an issue, she would have talked to him about it, he thought. In her small, dated apartment above the noisy tavern downstairs, Bethany was also deep in thought. The past few weeks, Albert didn't seem himself. He would be lost in thought most of the time, and she could tell that he was anxious about something. The bakery was at its peak, and she knew that the business couldn't be the problem. Whatever he was going through was more likely personal. They had gone through so much together in the past, and she couldn't understand why he wouldn't let her in on what was bothering him. Could he be thinking of going after Rose? She hoped not. That would put all her well-thought-out plans in jeopardy. The sudden loud banging down below her infuriated her even more, and she stomped her feet on the floor as hard as she could in anger. It was useless, as nobody could hear her. Frustrated, she broke down in tears. How long was she going to live like this? After leaving the orphanage, she'd sworn that that was the last time she would be miserable. She had then met Albert, and she'd felt that all her hopes and dreams were finally coming to fruition. Then Rose Watkins had appeared from nowhere, threatening Bethany's entire well-being. Well, she couldn't have that. She had taken care of Rose before she ruined everything. It now seemed as if the cycle was repeating itself. She had no idea whether Albert's change in behavior was because of a woman, but she could tell that whatever the reason was, she would have to fight back as she had with Rose. The noises downstairs were now louder than before, and her anger increased. She didn't deserve to be here. Her place was with Albert, at his home. Earlier on, when he'd asked her whether she was comfortable living at the apartment, she'd lied to him that she was all right. She didn't want to appear weak and helpless before him, but that's how she felt right then. She dragged herself to her bedroom, got into bed, and tried to sleep. At least it was closing time at the tavern, and she could hear as the drunks staggered out onto the streets with the women of the night hot on their heels. It was only a matter of time, she comforted herself. Very soon, all this would be like a bad dream. She would finally be where she'd always dreamed of being, and with the man of her dreams right by her side. The only problem was how to let him know how she felt without facing rejection or losing him forever. Chapter 7. Well? Mrs. Jones asked Daisy, who sat stupefied in her seat. I don't know what to say, she answered. She looked at the other girl who was patiently standing beside Mrs. Jones, smiling at Daisy. She's too naive. Does she know how cold Mrs. Jones is? Daisy thought. You could say yes, the older woman said. You could do with the money, Daisy. I know that. Okay, Mrs. Jones, I will come back, she answered, and Elizabeth, the new girl, smiled from ear to ear. I knew you would come back to your senses. Your father's death must have been hard on you, but it's time to get on with your life, Mrs. Jones said, her tone now back to normal, and Daisy wondered whether she'd just made a terrible mistake agreeing to come back. When do I start? Daisy found herself asking instead. Tomorrow should be fine, the older lady answered. As Daisy walked back home, her father's words echoed in her mind. There must have been a reason why Mrs. Jones had kept her working for this long. Elizabeth probably had no idea how to run the huge house, and the only person Mrs. Jones could think of to guide her was Daisy. Well, she had nothing to lose. She would save up every penny, and when the time was right, she would move to New York. Daisy was at Mrs. Jones's early the next morning and found Elizabeth eagerly waiting for her. One look at her and Daisy could tell that Elizabeth wasn't very wizened to the ways of the world. She was way too nice, the complete opposite of Daisy. I'm so happy you agreed to come back, Daisy, Elizabeth said as they scrubbed the kitchen floor on their hands and knees. Daisy stopped what she was doing and turned to look at her. Why are you acting like this is the best place you've ever been? Daisy scoffed. Because it is, Elizabeth answered, and Daisy let out a sarcastic laugh. That's because you haven't been here long enough, Daisy answered. It doesn't matter. I'd rather be here than where I was before, Elizabeth answered, and her face fell. Okay, if you say so, Daisy answered and went back to what she'd been doing earlier. She had her own problems, and she didn't care to know about another's. As the days went by, Daisy eventually started warming up to Elizabeth. It was hard not to when all they had was each other when Mrs. Jones became unbearable. As Elizabeth stayed at the servants' quarters, Daisy would find her countless times early in the morning with puffy eyes. She would then explain to Daisy that Mrs. Jones had been horrible the previous night, and she now understood why Daisy always seemed weary of the old lady. I don't plan on staying here for long, Daisy said. Why? Where are you going? Elizabeth asked. I don't know yet, but anywhere else is better than this place. Too many bad memories, Daisy said as her voice trailed off. I heard Mrs. Jones speaking about your late father. I never knew mine, Elizabeth said. Yes, he was a hard-working man, but he died a broken man. I hate the likes of Mrs. Jones and company, Daisy said, and Elizabeth could sense the bitterness in her voice. What did they do to you? Elizabeth said, leaning in to hear more, but Daisy shook her head. Not now. I will tell you all about it some other time, she said, and Elizabeth nodded in agreement. What are you two whispering about? Have all the chores been done with? Mrs. Jones said from the door, catching the two young ladies in surprise. Yes, ma'am, Elizabeth answered hastily. The older lady ran a finger along the wall cabinets and then blew imaginary dust into the air. Is this what you call clean? She glared at the girls. Elizabeth's lower lip started quivering as Daisy stood stoically beside her. There's no dust, ma'am. We wiped the cabinets a while ago, Daisy answered back without batting an eyelid. What? Are you calling me a liar? The older lady snapped. No, ma'am. I'm trying to explain to you that we already did our job, Daisy calmly said. You're an insolent young lady. Maybe I shouldn't have asked you to come back. Mrs. Jones yelled as she furiously turned and walked down the hallway with the long skirts of her dress flying wildly behind her. I can't stand her much longer, Daisy said. I wish I had somewhere to go to. I'd leave in a heartbeat. If you leave, I will come with you, Elizabeth said, and the sadness in her voice broke Daisy's heart. Why was Mrs. Jones so cruel? She wondered. As she walked home that evening, Daisy's eyes fell on a newspaper lying neatly on a stand, and curiosity got the best of her. She hadn't seen the said publication before, and she decided to buy a copy to occupy her quiet evening. I think that's exactly what you need, miss, the vendor said and smiled knowingly at Daisy. Thank you, sir, she answered as she tucked the newspaper under her arm and walked away, wondering what he meant. After a lonesome dinner, Daisy sat by the fireplace with the newspaper in tow. She flicked through the pages, wondering whether she would see anything interesting. Soon after, her eyes fell on a page full of thousands of ads. As she began to read, she realized they were all from gentlemen from the West looking for brides out east. She couldn't believe it. This was exactly what she'd been looking for, a way to finally leave Missouri for good. In her excitement, she'd forgotten about Elizabeth. She couldn't leave her behind, but she wasn't sure whether the other girl would warm up to the idea. She would ask her the following morning, but she already knew what she had to do. She would be leaving Missouri for good. Chapter 8. When Daisy arrived at Mrs. Jones the following morning, she found Elizabeth in tears. She didn't bother to ask her what the problem was, as she already knew the answer. Now more than ever, she was determined to leave the Joneses' house. It didn't matter the kind of man she would find out where she would go. She only wanted to leave all the bad memories behind. As she and Elizabeth went about their chores, they could feel Mrs. Jones's evil eyes on them. It was as if she sensed that Daisy wanted to talk to Elizabeth. Later that morning, they saw the madam leave the house with her coach driver. "Elizabeth, I have something to show you," Daisy said when they were finally alone. They went into the kitchen, and Daisy pulled the page with the ads from her dress pocket and laid it out on the table. "What's that?" Elizabeth timidly asked. "It's a page from a newspaper, obviously," Daisy said as she rolled her eyes and pushed the newspaper closer to her friend. "What is it about?" Elizabeth asked again. "Read it and you'll find out," Daisy said. She watched as the other girl stared at the newspaper for a couple of seconds before she shyly pushed it back to Daisy. "What's the matter, Elizabeth? Don't you want to find out what it says?" I can't read," she mumbled, her eyes filling up with tears. "I'm so sorry, I didn't realize. It's okay." "I will tell you what it says," Daisy said as she tried hard to mask her shock. "Elizabeth never went to school? What kind of a childhood did she have?" Many questions ran through Daisy's mind that she almost forgot what she was doing. "Thank you," Elizabeth mumbled. Daisy quickly told her what the ads entailed as Elizabeth listened keenly. "I'm going to write to one of the gentlemen," Daisy said, her eyes shining. "What will you say?" Elizabeth asked, astonished. "I will think of something. This is our ticket to leave this place," she explained to a surprised Elizabeth. "You're lucky, Daisy. It isn't that easy for me," Elizabeth said. "Why? You want to continue working for horrible Mrs. Jones?" Daisy asked. "No, it's not that," Elizabeth said, the uneasiness Daisy had seen before, evident in her posture. "What is it then?" she asked. "I can't write either," Elizabeth answered, shocking Daisy even further. "Okay, I will help you to write," Daisy said, smiling at her friend. "Really, thank you," Elizabeth said as she threw her arms around Daisy in glee. "I can also teach you how to read and write a few things," Daisy offered. "I would love that very much," Elizabeth exclaimed. The girls quickly finished their work and spent the rest of the afternoon going over the ads before their boss came back home. Daisy would read out everything to Elizabeth, and before long, they had both identified their prospective grooms. They were both from Nebraska, but in different towns. Daisy settled on a gentleman who owned a bakery in Brownsville, while Elizabeth settled for one in Lincoln. Alone at her home that night, Daisy read the ad again and wondered whether the said gentleman in Brownsville, Nebraska, would be a match. She knew nothing of Nebraska, but his ad had tugged at her heart, and she couldn't explain why. She settled at the small writing desk and took out her father's old stationery. She looked it over and decided that it would do just fine. After a few false starts, she eventually jotted down to the end and then settled back to read what she'd written. "Dear Sir, my name is Daisy Cobb. I have lived in Kansas City, Missouri, all my life. I lived with my father until he passed away recently. My mother died when I was a child. I can barely remember her. I'm 20 years old and I work as a house servant. I wish to start a new life far from Missouri, and I feel that Nebraska would be a good place to do just that. I wish to make your acquaintance. Would you be interested, perhaps? I eagerly await your reply. Yours sincerely, Daisy Cobb." The letter sounded great to her ears, and she didn't wish to change a thing. She felt that she had told him all that he needed to know for now. She wasn't even sure whether he would reply to her letter. Deep in her heart, she hoped that he would, so she didn't want to have to look for another suitor. She felt as if this was the one. She then pulled out another clean sheet of paper and wrote Elizabeth's letter. She would read it to her friend at work the following day, and if Elizabeth liked it, she would then mail them together at the postal exchange on her way home from work. She finished with her friend's letter and placed them in different envelopes. That done, she stretched out and walked over to the fireplace and sat on the floor. She thought about her father. Would he have approved of what she was doing? She would never know. One thing she was sure of was that he would have wanted her to live her life to the fullest. During their last conversation, he'd made it clear that he resented the fact that she worked at the Jones household, but he also knew it was the only way for them to survive. She looked around the small apartment and realized that there was nothing in there that she was going to miss. Sometimes she thought she heard her father's voice asking her to leave and never to look back. She had enough savings to stay on for a while longer, until she knew what fate had in store for her. She had spent all her adult life in this small space, somewhat sheltered from the harsh realities of the world out there, but it was now time to spread her wings. Chapter 9. Albert clutched the bunch of letters tightly in his hand as he walked back to his bakery. Jenkins had beckoned to him earlier that morning, and without any words being said, Albert had known what Jenkins wanted to tell him. He could feel Bethany's eyes boring into the back of his head as he walked back to his desk. Suddenly, he didn't feel comfortable opening the letters at the bakery. He would do it later on at home, he decided. It turned out to be the longest day of his life, as all he could think about were the letters. "Bethany, do we have any more orders being picked up this evening?" Albert asked. "No. Today has been slower than the rest of the weekdays," she answered, looking bored. "Good. I think we should leave early then. I feel like I have a headache coming on," he said, rubbing his temples like someone in pain. "Oh my, I didn't realize. Do you need me to come and prepare something for you to eat at home?" she asked. "No thanks. I don't have much of an appetite either," he answered. Any other day he would have been glad to have her help, but he needed time alone to read the letters. "All right then. I hope you feel better," she said. Albert thought she sounded disappointed, but he couldn't figure out why. He'd hoped she would jump at the idea of leaving work early to have some free time to do her own things. They closed the shop in silence, which was unlike them. And after Bethany left, Albert still had that nagging feeling that she was not happy to have left work early. It was now dawning on him that she had no social life. She always came to work at the same time every morning and left at the same time every evening. She was too committed to the bakery, and even though that wasn't a bad thing for him, he would soon talk to her about having a life of her own. He rode home at a slow trot, his mind racing. Who were the women who'd replied to his ad? Was his soulmate in one of the letters? He'd had his heart broken once, and he couldn't imagine going through the pain a second time. He quickly brushed the disturbing thoughts away as he tugged on the reins a bit harder. Bethany unlocked the door to her apartment, the lump in her throat growing larger. It was now obvious that Albert was keeping something from her, and it irked her. Trying as hard as she could, but she couldn't figure out what it was. When he'd told her that he wasn't feeling too well, she'd immediately known that he was lying. There was a reason that he wanted them to leave work earlier than usual, and she wished she could find out what it was. She would have known had a woman been involved, and she could swear that he wasn't interested in any woman around Brownsville. What secret, then, was he trying so hard to keep hidden? Her thoughts were rudely interrupted by the ruckus going on downstairs, and she felt as if she was losing her mind. She couldn't take it anymore. She was going to move on with her plan, even if it meant dealing with the consequences later. Time was of the essence, and she had already lost enough of it. Albert arrived home, went straight to the drawing room, and sank into his favorite couch. He brought out the neatly arranged stack of letters from his jacket pocket and placed them on the table in front of him. He stared at them for a second and then picked one up. As he went to open it, he realized his hands were clammy with sweat. He wiped them on the legs of his jeans and then opened the first letter. The lady was being unrealistic with her demands, and he threw it to the side. He picked a second one, and the lady was an old maid. Clearly, She hadn't read his ad well. Otherwise, she would have known that she didn't meet his age requirements. The next letters weren't any better, and he was beginning to feel as if this had been a complete waste of time. Prosody, he was about to throw in the towel when the next letter caught him by surprise. It was from a 20-year-old lady from Kansas City, Missouri, and she sounded exactly what he was looking for. Her name was Daisy Cobb, and she worked as a house servant. She hadn't made awkward demands and had only written what he needed to know at that time. He could feel in his bones that she was the one. A sudden urge to know more about her overcame him, and he rushed to his writing desk before courage failed him. He sat frozen for a minute as he tried to find the right words to tell her. This was it. He couldn't lose this chance, or he would never find another one. He composed himself, pulled out his stationery, and began jotting down. He was careful not to sound too pompous lest she lose interest in him. He couldn't sound desperate either, but deep down in his heart, he knew that that was how he'd been feeling lately. He read the letter to himself when he was done, and after rectifying a few lines, he felt that it was good enough to be mailed. Too bad that he couldn't have a second opinion, since the only person he trusted with his life was Bethany, and he had kept this from her. He just had to trust in himself and pray that Daisy would write him back. He would be crushed if she didn't. Chapter 10. Daisy was beside herself when Albert's letter arrived. She hadn't expected him to reply to her, and yet he had made her feel as if her parents were smiling down on her from heaven. She couldn't wait to read it to Elizabeth, who was still waiting for hers to arrive. As Daisy left her house to go to work, she felt as if nothing could spoil the day for her, not even Mrs. Jones's foul mood swings. Daisy still found it hard to believe how nice the older lady pretended to be when she needed Daisy to come back to work. Daisy planned to leave work without informing Mrs. Jones to teach her a lesson. She hoped Elizabeth would be able to leave as well. That would teach the old lady a lesson she would never forget. As she neared Mrs. Jones's house, Daisy's heart was at peace, unlike the other times when it would thunder loudly in her chest as she worried about her ill-tempered boss. "You're awfully early today, Daisy," Elizabeth said as her friend walked into the house. "I sure am, and I have wonderful news to share with you," Daisy answered with a gleam in her eye. "What is it? Tell me," Elizabeth asked, her curiosity roused. "Not here. I will tell you a bit later on when the madam goes in for her afternoon nap," Daisy answered as she rushed to change into her work clothes. "Okay, I can't wait to find out what it is," Elizabeth answered as she went back to what she had been doing. Later that afternoon, the two ladies huddled together at the back of the house, and Daisy brought out the letter from her pocket. "Daisy, is that what I think it is?" Elizabeth asked as she moved closer to take a better look. "Yes, it is. Let me read it to you," Daisy answered. "Yes, please do. I can't wait to hear what he says," Elizabeth gushed as Daisy unfolded the white sheet of paper and began to read. "Dear Daisy, I received your letter with a lot of excitement. My name is Albert Moss, and I live in Brownsville, Nebraska. I'm 32 years old, and I own a bakery here in Brownsville. Your introduction letter appealed to me very much, and I feel you're the one I'm looking for. Yes, I'm interested in knowing more about you. I eagerly await your next letter. Yours sincerely, Albert Moss." The girls shrieked out in laughter as they held hands and jumped around with excitement before they quickly went quiet lest someone heard them. "He's already in love with you," Elizabeth said. "You think so?" Daisy asked, even though she already knew the answer. "He'll ask you to marry him in his next letter," Elizabeth observed. "And I will say yes," Daisy answered, but then she saw the look of sadness on Elizabeth's face. "What's the matter?" "I don't think I'm going to receive one, and it's for the best. Who would want to marry someone who can neither read nor write to save her life?" Elizabeth posed. "We didn't say in the letter that you can't do either of these things," Daisy said. "It doesn't matter. They will find out anyways and won't want to marry me. I'm doomed to working for Mrs. Jones forever," she said. "Don't say that. Your letter is on its way. I can feel it." Daisy tried to reassure a discouraged Elizabeth. Daisy wrote to Albert later that night in her house, and their correspondence was established. To her delight, Elizabeth also received a letter from a gentleman in Lincoln, Nebraska, a week later. Daisy helped her to read it and also to write a reply. Now, all they had to do was to wait for his response. Albert asked Daisy to marry him in his next letter, and she didn't hesitate. She was overjoyed and couldn't wait to break the wonderful news to her friend the next day. "I will find out about the trip details, and then you will sneak out and come to my house. Prosody rate 7%. We will thereafter leave together on the wagon train," Daisy explained to her friend one afternoon as they cleaned the kitchen. Elizabeth had also been proposed to, and she had also agreed to travel to Nebraska to get married. Daisy had handled all her communications, and she had assured Elizabeth that the gentleman in question was also in Nebraska, but in a different town called Lincoln. Since then, they'd been planning on how to leave without saying a word to their employer. Mrs. Jones had caught them a couple of times whispering to each other, and she couldn't hide her displeasure. Every time, threatening them with being fired. They would act as natural as possible, and Mrs. Jones couldn't imagine what was about to happen to her household. "One of these days, I'm going to send both of you back to your homes. Did you come here to work or to regale each other with tales from your pasts?" she'd said one afternoon when she caught them talking and laughing behind the house. "I'm sorry, ma'am, it won't happen again," Elizabeth said, trying hard not to laugh. "You better see to it that it doesn't," the older lady had retorted before going back into her house. "If only she knew what's in store for her," Daisy said, as they watched the madam's retreating back disappear inside the house. "I wish I could see her reaction when she realizes that we're both gone," Elizabeth said, and then looked to the ground, overcome with guilt. "Maybe we should let her know so she can find new servants." "Elizabeth, you're far too nice for this cruel world. Why in heavens would you feel sorry for someone like Mrs. Jones?" Daisy asked, her face showing displeasure at her friend's weakness. "It would be the right thing to do after she offered us jobs," Elizabeth said. And Daisy burst out laughing. Elizabeth was truly one of a kind, Daisy thought, amused. Chapter 11. Albert was ecstatic when Daisy accepted his marriage proposal. This was what he'd hoped for, but soon his excitement turned into panic. What if she arrived and didn't like either him, his house, or Brownsville in general? He would be crushed for sure. All he could do now was to hope that everything went well. They'd agreed that she would travel on the wagon train, and in his last letter, he'd sent her enough money to make sure that she traveled as comfortably as possible. He wanted to make a good impression on her, even before they physically met. It then occurred to him that they couldn't stay in the same house alone as an unmarried couple. It was frowned upon and deemed scandalous by society. This was another dilemma, as it meant that Daisy had nowhere to stay when she arrived. She would be here soon, and he had to think fast and find her a place to stay until after they were married. The Brownsville Hotel seemed like the best option. He would book her a room once she arrived, he decided. That settled, he went about his business as usual as he waited for her arrival. Albert tried to find the right time to bring up the subject with Bethany, but every time he would develop cold feet. At other times, she would be in the worst of moods, and he would be afraid to tell her something that would aggravate her further. But as the days passed and Daisy's arrival drew closer, he felt that he couldn't wait any longer, and one evening after work, he decided that it was time he let the cat out of the bag. "Bethany, I need to talk to you about something before we leave," he began, and he could sense her apprehension. "Have I done something wrong?" she asked, a worried look on her face. No, it's the complete opposite. I have been keeping something from you, but I feel the time has come for you to know about it," he said. He removed his hat, placed it on his knee, and straightened his back. "What is it? You're scaring me," Bethany said, but in her mind she was jumping for joy. She had known all along that he was keeping a secret from her, but she had been unable to figure out what it was. "I'm expecting a visitor in the next 2 weeks." He began and then went silent to give her time to digest what he'd said. Her face brightened, and with a pleasant smile she said, "I had no idea you had relatives. Why haven't you ever said a thing?" "I didn't say it was a relative, Bethany, and for the record, I have no known living relative," he said, and he saw a shadow cross her face. "Then who is it?" she asked. "Have you ever heard of the mail-order bride service?" he asked. "Yes, but what has that got to do with you?" She quipped, "A lot, as I'm expecting my bride from Missouri in a couple of weeks. I didn't tell you earlier, as I didn't know whether she would accept my marriage proposal. Luckily she has, and she's on her way to Nebraska as we speak," he said, not quite looking at her. He felt guilty that it had taken him this long to come clean to her. Bethany felt her knees begin to buckle beneath her, and she slowly walked to the nearest counter and steadied herself. She could have never imagined that this was what he'd been keeping from her. She'd thought he was out looking for Rose, not her replacement. She stared at the wall in disbelief, her heart beating so loudly in her chest that she could hear the blood rushing through her ears. "Did you hear what I said?" Albert asked after she'd taken too long to say something. She cleared her throat. "Yes, Albert, I did. I'm shocked as I had no idea," she replied, trying her best to keep her voice from quivering, but on the inside she was seething with rage. "I was waiting for the right time," he replied. "I see," she answered as calmly as she could. "Speaking of which, I've been meaning to talk to you about the same subject. Don't you ever wish to settle down and have a family of your own?" he asked, oblivious to the hurt he'd just inflicted on her. She swallowed hard and blinked back tears. He clearly had no idea how much he meant to her. She had taken too long to let him know how she felt, and now another woman had snatched him right from under her nose. Of course, she wished to settle down and have a family of her own, but with him. That's all she'd ever wanted since she'd arrived in Brownsville and met him. "I have thought about it, but I haven't met the right person," she said in an even tone, even though her heart was breaking. "I think you aren't searching hard enough. A beautiful lady like you would catch any man's eye in a second," he said and laughed. He'd expected her to laugh along with him, but when she didn't, he turned to her and for the first time saw the expression on her face. He couldn't tell whether it was sadness or something else. "Come now, dear Bethany. The fact that I'm getting married doesn't mean anything has to change between us. You will always be very dear to me, you hear?" he said as he stood and walked to where she was standing. He placed his hands around her comfortingly, and it was too much for her. She started sobbing as he continued holding her and reassuring her that it was all going to be okay. As he was holding her, it finally dawned on her that she had truly lost him. He had absolutely no idea how she felt about him. Even now, he held her the way a man would hold his sister. At least he thought she was beautiful. She thought bitterly. It was a pity, though, as she wasn't going to let the wedding happen just like she had with Rose. Chapter 12. It has been confirmed, Elizabeth. We will be leaving at the end of the week. Daisy happily relayed the good news to her friend. "This means we only have 3 days left," Elizabeth answered, her expression a bit dour. "What's the problem?" "I thought you would be jumping for joy," Daisy said, wondering why her friend wasn't ecstatic about the news. "I don't think I have enough money to make the long journey," Elizabeth answered, and Daisy sighed. "Why do you always have to worry so much? We're traveling on the Wagon train. Albert sent enough money for my travels. I'm going to buy a wagon for us. You'll be riding with me," Daisy gushed, but Elizabeth still looked apprehensive. "You've already done so much for me, Daisy. I want to contribute to the trip as well," she insisted. "Okay, we will discuss that at my house tomorrow. You have to sneak out of here after dusk. Mrs. Jones shouldn't get a whiff of this," Daisy said, and Elizabeth nodded her agreement. "I have my suitcase packed and hidden under the bed," she assured Daisy. "Good. She won't know what hit her." Daisy gloated, but Elizabeth still looked unsure. "Elizabeth, I hope you won't do anything stupid." "No, Daisy, I won't. I can't wait to get out of this place either. I just wish the circumstances had been different," she said. "Well, they aren't," Daisy answered, and they both went quiet. Mrs. Jones had been particularly harsh on them for quite a while now, and nothing they did seemed to please her. One day, feeling fed up, Daisy had even dared Mrs. Jones to fire her if she wasn't happy with her work. Of course she couldn't, as she would never be able to find better servants. Mrs. Jones had glared at Daisy before walking away in a huff. It was only a matter of time before both of them walked away out of their own free will, Daisy had thought, and she could hardly wait. Daisy cast another glance at her wall clock, her fingers tapping impatiently on the table as she paced to and fro the small apartment. Elizabeth was supposed to have arrived 10 minutes ago, but she still wasn't there. Could she have opted out of the plan at the last minute? That was impossible. She looked forward to meeting her future husband in Nebraska just as much as Daisy was. What if Mrs. Jones had caught her sneaking out of the house and decided to lock her up in the house? A quick, sharp knock at the door sounded, cutting off Daisy's trail of thoughts. She rushed to the front door, and to her dismay, it was the apartment's caretaker, Dugan. "Good evening, Miss Cobb. May I have a word with you?" he asked in his annoying, squeaky voice. "Of course, Dugan. What's this about?" Daisy asked as she looked past his shoulder, trying to see whether she could spot Elizabeth walking up to the apartment. "Boss wants to know what time you'll be leaving the premises tomorrow so I can come and lock up," he said. "I'll be out by 7 o'clock in the morning," she answered as she continued to look over his shoulder. "Is something the matter, miss?" Dugan asked, turning to look at whatever she was staring at. "No, Dugan, everything is okay," she answered, her gaze on him this time. "If you say so, miss," Dugan said as he shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "I do," Daisy answered. She turned and walked inside the apartment and closed the door behind her. Dugan was left standing on the front step. She then peeped from the kitchen window facing the street, and she saw him slowly walking away. He wasn't a bad person, but she didn't have the time to entertain him. Her mind was on Elizabeth, who still hadn't arrived at the apartment. It would break her heart should Elizabeth fail to show up. She would sadly have to leave her dear friend behind. Daisy was almost dozing off on the couch when she thought she heard a hesitant knock at the front door. She listened intently again, and she heard it clearly this time. The room was engulfed in darkness, and she quickly lit the lantern and then went to check on whoever was at the door. She hoped that it wasn't Dugan coming back to bother her further. "Elizabeth, what took you so long?" Daisy asked, relief washing over her at the sight of her friend. She ushered a breathless Elizabeth into the apartment and locked the door behind them. "I almost didn't make it," Elizabeth said as she set her suitcase on the floor. "Why, what happened?" Daisy asked. "Mrs. Jones had me by her side the entire evening. It was almost as if she could sense that something was amiss. I had to wait for her to go to her room, and then I dashed out," she explained to Daisy's amusement. "I can imagine her coming out of her room to an empty house. It's worse than when Mr. Jones is away on business," Daisy said. "Poor Mrs. Jones," Elizabeth said, and Daisy laughed even harder. "Don't worry about her. She will be fine. The rich always are." "Are you hungry?" she asked. "I could eat something," Elizabeth answered. After dinner, Daisy filled Elizabeth in on what the plan was for the following day. She then told her friend about her early life and how she had lived comfortably with her father before his terrible accident. The more she talked, the more Elizabeth understood Daisy's bitterness towards the privileged in life and with life itself. It was a little after midnight when the girls went to bed. It was obvious that neither of them would sleep well, as each pondered over the next phase of their lives. Chapter 13. They woke up the following morning at the crack of dawn. They quickly bathed, and Daisy made them breakfast from the little food that remained in the larder. Both of their suitcases were packed and placed near the front door. Daisy had hired a taxi buggy to take them to Independence, where they were to join the wagon train. While Elizabeth was relaxed and ready to go, Daisy lingered around the apartment some more as the memories she'd made with her father came flooding back. She was leaving all that behind, and it was bittersweet. She tried to fight back, but the tears came in torrents, and this time Elizabeth was the one to comfort her. "Don't be sad, Daisy. You're lucky to have had such good memories," she said and placed a comforting hand on her friend's trembling shoulder. "I would have given anything to remain here with my father." Daisy sobbed. I know, but you have to move on with your life now. It's what he'd have wanted for you, Elizabeth said, and her friend calmed down somewhat. I'm sorry for breaking down like that, Daisy said as she sniffed and blew her nose. It's okay. Now help me fix my hair, and I'll help you with yours as well, Elizabeth said, and managed to bring a smile to Daisy's lips. A little after 7, Daisy and Elizabeth sat on the couch, eagerly waiting for the taxi buggy to arrive. A slight knock on the door had Daisy rushing to the front door to see who it was. It was the taxi buggy driver. Good morning, miss. Are you ladies ready? We have quite a long drive to Independence, and the sooner we start on our way, the better, he said as he smiled warmly at Daisy. Yes, we are. Kindly bring our luggage out to the buggy, Daisy instructed as she rushed inside and motioned for Elizabeth to come outside. Yes, with pleasure, miss, the gentleman answered. He came out of the apartment with the 2 suitcases and loaded them onto the buggy. He then helped them both onto the buggy, and before long they were riding down the street, the crisp morning air caressing their cheeks. Daisy looked back at the place she'd called home for years, and hot tears burned the insides of her eyes. She wasn't going to break down this time. This was a new chapter in her life, and she was going to embrace it without feeling any more guilt. As they rode along, Daisy would point out a place and tell Elizabeth what she knew or didn't know about it. That's where I went to school, she pointed to a dilapidated building that looked deserted now. Why does it look like that? Elizabeth asked, horrified at the sight. They built a bigger one on the other side of town and this one was abandoned. I don't understand why they did that, she explained, perplexed as well. Ladies, you need to brace yourselves now. The road ahead is a bit rough, the driver said, turning his head slightly backward to face the girls from his front position. That's okay. Just make sure we arrive in Independence on time, Daisy said, and he nodded. No problem, miss. We'll be there before you know it, he answered, and then went back to looking at the road ahead. Here we are, the driver said when they arrived in Independence. He drove them to where a number of wagons were packed. He then helped them down, unloaded their suitcases, and placed them next to the girls. Thank you very much, Daisy said. She reached inside her reticule, removed some money, and paid the man his dues. Safe travels, ladies, he said as he got back on the wagon and rode away. Well, Elizabeth, this is it, Daisy exclaimed and turned to her friend. Elizabeth stood shocked, staring at the sea of people milling around the wagons. I didn't realize there would be so many people, she said, and Daisy smiled. Of course there are. Prosody. All these people are travelers on the wagon train as well, she explained. Just then a young man walked towards them, and Daisy waved him over. Do you know where I can buy a wagon? She asked, and the young man pointed to a number of wagons set slightly aside from the others. Go over there and ask to speak to McGuire. He will help you, he answered, and then walked away. Watch over the luggage. I'll be right back, Daisy told Elizabeth, who was still amazed by the huge number of travelers milling around the wagons. She watched as Daisy walked over to the man, and after a short discussion, she saw Daisy reach into her reticule again and give something to the man. She rushed back to where Elizabeth was standing and happily gushed, We have ourselves a wagon. Let's go and load our luggage, and then we can go and buy the provisions we'll need for the duration of the trip, Daisy instructed. As they dragged their heavy luggage down to the wagon, chatting animatedly, Elizabeth bumped into another young lady who stood in the middle of the path looking lost. Pardon, miss, but you're standing in the way, Elizabeth said, and she saw the panic in the young lady's eyes. She mumbled something, but Elizabeth didn't quite catch it. She looks rich. I wonder what she's doing here with the rest of us, Daisy sneered, and cast a dirty look back at the hapless-looking lady. She looks confused to me. She might be rich, but something is definitely wrong with her, Elizabeth said. She felt sorry for the stranger, and when she looked back, the lady was still standing in the same spot. They tried to load the suitcases onto the wagon in vain. Then, the older man that Daisy was speaking to earlier approached them and offered to help. He easily loaded the 2 suitcases onto the wagon and walked away. When Elizabeth looked back at the young lady she had bumped into, she was still standing there confused. She needed help, Elizabeth could tell. Chapter 14. He's such a nice man. His name is McGuire, and he's also the wagon master. I've introduced myself and you to him in case we need more help from him, Daisy explained, but noticed that her friend wasn't listening to her. She was still fixated on the young lady they'd seen earlier. Don't worry about her too much. I'm sure she must be waiting for someone. I don't know Daisy. She looks confused and unsure of her surroundings. Elizabeth tried to convince a skeptical Daisy, but her concerns were waved away. Forget about her. We have more important matters to take care of, Daisy impatiently said. She took Elizabeth by the arm and led her across the road to the stores lining up the street. They passed the young lady again at the exact same spot. They walked into various stores buying whatever they felt they needed, and before long they were hauling along a couple of heavy sacks back to the wagon. Elizabeth had offered to pay for some of the provisions, but Daisy would hear none of it. Please keep your money safely. I already told you that I have more than enough, Daisy had said, much to Elizabeth's chagrin. You've done so much for me. Why won't you let me help you? Elizabeth had asked, and Daisy only shook her head from side to side. Wouldn't you have done the same for me had the situation been reversed? Daisy asked. Of course you know I would have, Elizabeth answered. Then fret no more, Daisy said, and that had been the end of that conversation. They'd just finished loading up the foodstuff when someone knocked on the side of the wagon, and Daisy motioned for Elizabeth to find out who it was. Elizabeth stuck her head out, and to her amazement, it was McGuire, and beside him, standing timidly, was the young lady they'd walked past a couple of times before. Hey, Elizabeth, I need a favor from both you and Daisy, McGuire said. Sure, McGuire, what do you need? Elizabeth asked. I need you to ride with this young lady to Nebraska. There has been a problem with her wagon, he explained, his eyes pleading. Of course she can ride with us, Elizabeth said, and then cast a glance inside the wagon towards Daisy was busy trying to organize their luggage in position. Sure, Daisy? Daisy nodded her agreement with a sour look on her face. Luckily, McGuire couldn't see it. He had been very helpful to them earlier, and she felt she owed him this favor. It's okay, McGuire. Where is her luggage? Elizabeth asked. She didn't care how Daisy felt. She had known from the first time she'd laid her eyes on the young lady that something was amiss. It was sad that Daisy had opted to judge her before finding out what she could have been going through. Ned will bring it over to you shortly, McGuire answered. I suggest you also get ready, as we are about to depart. Ned turned out to be the young man who'd spoken with Daisy earlier. He brought the young lady's suitcases, and before long, their journey had commenced. Daisy kept throwing nasty glances at the stranger, wondering what she was doing sharing a wagon with them. From the clothes she wore, she looked to be of a higher stature in life, and unable to control her curiosity, she turned to her. What's your name? She asked the scared-looking lady. I'm Cindy Walters, she answered, her gaze on the floor. I'm Daisy Cobb, and this is my friend Elizabeth Long, Daisy answered, as Elizabeth smiled warmly at Cindy. Why aren't you traveling in your own wagon? Daisy shot at her, but Elizabeth came to Cindy's rescue. Daisy, please let Cindy be, Elizabeth said, and Daisy left Cindy alone. Being on the trail together brought the girls together, and they realized they were all headed for the same mission, to be mail-order brides. Cindy told the girls how she'd ended up being on the trail, and Daisy was remorseful for having judged her so harshly earlier. I saw your elegant clothes and mannerisms and thought ill of you, and I'm sorry, she apologized. It's all forgiven, Daisy. I have judged people wrongly a couple of times before, Cindy said, and the girls laughed. They knew exactly what she meant. The girls comforted each other as the terrain became tougher, and they were overjoyed when, after 4 treacherous months, they arrived in Nebraska. Elizabeth and Cindy jumped off in Lincoln while Daisy was left to proceed to Brownsville. I hope to see the two of you soon, Daisy tearfully bid her friends farewell. See you soon, Daisy, the two girls waved as the wagon train rode off. Left alone on the wagon, Daisy wondered whether she would ever see her friends again. She had left Kansas City, Missouri, with only one friend but had gained another one on the trail. She felt that that was a sign that good things awaited her in Brownsville, and she was glad that she had made this trip. The wagon train arrived in Brownsville, and Daisy alighted and looked at the place that would be her future home. Everything looked different. The townsfolk dressed differently and talked differently as well. While Kansas City was bustling with activity, Brownsville was somewhat laid back, and no one seemed to be in a hurry. She adjusted her bonnet, which was stuck to her forehead with sweat, and sighed. It had been 4 long months on the trail after all. "Miss Cobb?" a voice inquired from behind her. "Yes," she said as she turned to find out where the voice had come from. A tall gentleman in a red checked shirt, blue jeans, and a wide-brimmed cowboy hat stood there, smiling down at her. She immediately knew it was him. "I'm Albert Moss." He introduced himself, but all Daisy could think about was how handsome he was. "Miss Cobb, are you okay?" Daisy could have kicked herself. She realized she'd been staring at him, and catching herself quickly, she held out her gloved hand, assuming that he was ready to accept it. He took it and pressed his lips against it lightly. Chapter 15. "It's very nice to finally meet you," Albert said, his blue eyes staring intently at hers. "And I you," Daisy replied, suddenly out of breath. What was wrong with her? "Welcome to Brownsville. I hope you'll like it here," he said, and she could tell that he was enjoying how uncomfortable he was making her. "It's a beautiful town. I know I will like it very much," she answered. "Are you hungry?" "We can get something to eat at the hotel down the street," he said. "Yes, that would be nice," she answered. "Good. Is that all the luggage you brought with you?" He pointed at a suitcase lying next to her feet. "Yes," she replied. "Okay, if you will please follow me," he said as he effortlessly picked up the suitcase and began walking down the street. She followed slowly behind, and he would turn back every now and then to make sure that she was still behind him. After a short distance, they arrived at the hotel, and Albert led her towards the restaurant area overlooking the reception area. He pulled out a seat for her and then placed the suitcase down next to her. "I need to go to the reception to sort out a few things. Wait for me here," he said, and flashed her one of his dashing smiles. "We will order some food when I come back." Daisy watched as he walked to the reception and began talking with the young man behind the desk. They seemed to be going back and forth about something, and finally, Albert threw his arms up in the air and left the desk in a huff. Daisy wondered what had gone wrong. All she needed was some food and to freshen up. He came to her table, sat opposite her, and waved a waiter over. "Let's eat first, and then we will talk later," he said, and Daisy nodded her agreement. She could see that his mood had changed, and it was obvious that whatever had taken place at the front desk had disappointed him deeply. The waiter took their orders, and he soon came back with their food. They ate in silence, each engrossed in their own thoughts. Afterward, the waiter cleared their table, and as soon as he'd left, Albert cleared his throat and turned to Daisy. "I was trying very hard to make sure that your first day here was as comfortable as possible, but I'm afraid that something has gone wrong," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "What's the problem?" she asked, beginning to panic. "I'd hoped to pay for a room here for you to stay at until after our wedding on Thursday, but I've been informed that the only room left has been reserved for a rich traveler who will be arriving this evening," he explained. "What are we going to do now?" Daisy asked, thinking that this was just what she needed. After such a long and tiresome journey, she now had nowhere to stay. "There's only one thing we can do. You will have to come home with me," he said as a matter of fact, and Daisy was shocked. "What? Are we allowed to stay under one roof before marriage?" she asked. "No, not when it's just the two of us, but with a chaperone we can," he explained. "Where will you get a chaperone on such short notice?" she asked. "Don't worry, I have the perfect person in mind," he replied with a slight smile, and Daisy felt at ease. "Shall we?" He led them out of the hotel, and Daisy dutifully followed him, not knowing where she was being led to. Soon enough, Daisy knew where they were headed when sweet baking aromas wafted to her nostrils. As they walked into the bakery, her attention was quickly caught by a slender lady who was standing by the front counter, keenly watching her and Albert. "Bethany, this is Daisy," Albert said to the lady, who pretended to smile, but Daisy could see right through her. He walked to his desk and placed the suitcase on the floor, and then motioned for Daisy to come have a seat. "It's very nice to meet you, Daisy." "I'm Bethany, Albert's longtime friend and employee," she said. "It's nice to meet you as well, Bethany," Daisy replied, and immediately realized that she already had a rival, but Albert seemed clueless. "Well, Bethany, I'm in a fix, and I need your help. I couldn't secure a room for Daisy at the hotel. I don't have any other choice but to take her to my house. I hope you can be our chaperone." "I don't know who else to ask," he said, and Bethany's eyes lit up. "Of course, Albert, I would love to help," she gushed. Here was a chance to live inside Albert's house regardless of the circumstances. She had dreamed of this a million times, but it had never come to pass. Who knows, she might go in and never leave. She thought happily. "Thank you, Bethany. I knew I could count on you," he answered, smiling with relief. He couldn't have asked for a better friend, he mused. "I'm always here whenever you need me. Never forget that," she answered. Daisy watched the drama unfolding before her, and she could neither believe her eyes nor her ears. Bethany was displaying her dislike of Daisy in front of Albert, who was none the wiser. She could tell that Albert truly believed that Bethany was his friend. She was clearly head over heels in love with Albert, but poor man, he had no idea. Daisy wasn't prepared to go down without a fight. She had come all this way to marry him, and now that she had physically met him, nothing and no one was going to stand in her way. She'd weathered storms worse than Bethany. This was one obstacle she couldn't have imagined, but she was ready to deal with it. She caught Bethany staring at her in a hostile manner behind Albert's back, and she returned the look. Both ladies knew that they had just declared war on each other. Chapter 16. Daisy and Bethany did their best to act normal around Albert, as each tried their best to outsmart the other. Bethany was fast discovering that Daisy was nothing like Rose, as she was proving to be a real worthy opponent. Albert hired a local young man, Cole Timmons, to stand in for Bethany at the bakery for the few days that she would be away. The wedding was slated to be in 2 days at the same church where Rose had left him at the altar. It was all coming together better than he could have imagined, and he couldn't have been happier. "You shouldn't have come here, you know," Bethany glared at Daisy as they sat in the drawing room. Albert was out seeing to the last-minute wedding plans. "I'm getting married to him tomorrow, and there's nothing you can do to stop it," Daisy shot back. She'd decided to wait until after they were married, and then she would let Albert know what kind of a person Bethany was. "We will see about that. You will not be a first, that I can assure you," Bethany said, and then regretted the words as soon as they left her mouth. This wasn't the time to tell Daisy about Rose. What if she ran to Albert? All her plans would crumble. "What do you mean?" Daisy asked, her curiosity getting the best of her. "Nothing. It was just a figure of speech," Bethany shrugged, and Daisy was even more convinced that there was a story behind that comment. "Does Albert know this version of you?" she asked instead. "He knows what he needs to know, and I'm okay with that," she gloated. "What would he do if he found out how vindictive you are?" Daisy asked. "And who's to tell him, you? He would never believe you," she said, and Daisy knew there was some truth to that. They'd known each other for years, and Daisy was just getting to know him. She needed to have concrete evidence if she was to remove Bethany from their lives. "What are my 2 favorite ladies whispering about?" Albert said as he walked into the drawing room, catching them by surprise. A second earlier, and he could have heard what they'd been talking about. "Oh, it's nothing. We're just getting to know each other is all," Bethany said, smiling at him, and Daisy wanted to kick her. What a snake! She fumed on the inside. "Did everything go well?" Daisy asked. He had been out making sure that all was well for their wedding, which was to be on the following day. "Yes, everything is in place. In fact, I would like us to discuss that with you. Bethany, if you could allow us," Albert said. "Of course, Albert, I'll be upstairs in my room should you need me," she said as she rose and walked out of the room. "Are you ready to marry me tomorrow?" Albert asked as he sat next to Daisy on the couch. "Yes, I am." "Why are you having second thoughts?" she teased. "Never. You're everything I thought you'd be and more," he said, and Daisy felt her cheeks flush crimson. Albert watched her blush, and he thought it was the best sight he'd seen in years. She was strikingly beautiful, with long hair that framed her oval face perfectly and big almond eyes that seemed to stare into one's soul. She was petite with gentle features, and it was hard for him to reconcile that with the fact that she'd been working as a house servant. She'd been here for 2 days, and he had no doubt in his mind that he wanted to spend the rest of his life with her. Not even Rose had had that kind of an effect on him. "I feel the same way as well," she said, and knew that she meant it. "I know we are going to be very happy together. I can feel it in my bones. Can you?" He asked as he took her hand and gently ran a finger inside the length of her palm, sending shivers throughout her entire body. "Yes," she answered. His face was so close to hers that she could feel his warm breath caressing her face softly. Had either of them leaned in a little, their lips would have touched. "Well, I can't wait to see you at the altar tomorrow," he said, as he abruptly let go of her hand and moved back. "Of course, I will be there," she said, and this time she looked him straight in the eyes. He had to know how serious she was. He returned her look, and without any more words being said, they knew that the following day would be the beginning of the rest of their lives together. That night, Daisy could hardly sleep as she thought about her wedding. She'd fallen in love with Albert as soon as she'd set her eyes on him, and now he'd confessed that he felt the same. The only problem was Bethany. Daisy knew that Bethany was willing to go to any length to break them apart. She drifted off to sleep, her mind racing to find a way to nip Bethany's plans in the bud. Chapter 17. Albert and Daisy were married at the local church in a small ceremony with only a handful of his loyal customers, who were also his friends, in attendance. This time, the priest was happy that the bride had actually made it to the altar. Later in the afternoon, everyone went back to Albert's house, where a buffet awaited them. Everyone agreed that it was a small but beautiful ceremony. As the guests congratulated the couple, wished them well, and made merry, Albert pulled his new bride aside and led her to a quiet corner. "I thought you'd be happy today. Why do I see sadness in your eyes?" he asked. "I wished my father would have been present to walk me down the aisle," she replied, and he took her hand in his to comfort her. "I know he's very proud of you wherever he is. Do you think he would have liked me?" he asked, swiftly changing the subject, and she rewarded him with a smile. "I know he would have loved you," she replied. "And I would have loved him as well," he said, and laid a gentle kiss on her forehead. "I've been meaning to ask you something. Do you really know Bethany that well?" she asked, and he gave her a puzzled look. "Yes, of course, as well as one can know another. Why do you ask?" he asked, sounding amused by her question. "Oh, well, you two seem to enjoy a very close friendship. Do you really trust her?" she pressed on. "I trust her with my life. Wait a minute. Where is all this coming from? Are you jealous?" he asked and laughed. He was taking the whole situation very lightly. But then again, he didn't know half of what Daisy knew about Bethany. "No, I'm not jealous. I only wanted to see how much you know about your dear friend," she answered, and Albert wasn't lost to the subtle hint of sarcasm. "I hope she's now going to be your friend as well," he said. "Not a chance," Daisy mumbled. "What was that?" he asked. "It's nothing. Shouldn't we be getting back to the party?" she said, and he nodded. As they walked back to join the rest of the guests, Daisy turned to the side to find Bethany glaring at her fiercely. Albert was busy speaking with one of the guests. The look sent cold shivers down Daisy's back, and she quickly turned away. There was no sugarcoating it now. Bethany meant her harm, and she had to watch her back at all times. Daisy adjusted well to being married, and life in Brownsville was turning out to be better than she had imagined. Albert was slowly teaching her about his business, and she would spend most of her afternoons at the bakery. After the wedding, Albert had decided to keep Cole on as an employee and hoped that it would lessen Bethany's workload. She had resisted the idea at first, but Albert had finally been able to convince her. There was no love lost between her and Daisy, and they did their best to stay out of one another's way. "Daisy, I don't appreciate your treatment of Bethany," Albert said one evening as they sat relaxing after dinner. "What are you talking about?" Daisy asked, surprised. She had noticed that he had been quiet lately, but she'd attributed it to work issues. "I've now found her at the bakery a couple of times in tears. She says you're giving her a hard time at work, and she can't take it any longer," he said, turning to look at her. "What a nerve! I have done no such thing. I barely speak to her. Do you really know this woman?" Daisy shot back in disbelief. "Yes, I do. I have known her longer than I have known you," he said, and Daisy was taken aback. "Are you taking her word over mine?" she asked, feeling hurt. "She has never lied to me," he said as his wife stared at him, lost for words. "You think you know her, but you don't. She has been horrible to me ever since I arrived here. She's always been in love with you, and she can't stand another woman being by your side," she cried. "Oh, come now, stop it. Why didn't you tell me about this earlier?" "I am beginning to think you're the one I really don't know," he retorted, and then turned away from her. Shocked at the turn of events, Daisy stood up with tears blurring her vision. "I'm going to sleep in the spare room," she said. She stood and began to walk away, and he made no effort to stop her. That night, Daisy wept bitterly as she thought about her situation, and she could see Bethany's threats were coming to pass. Albert was upset to the point where he didn't want to sleep in the same room with her. How was she going to stop Bethany? The situation escalated to the point where Albert asked Daisy to stop going to the bakery. He didn't want her upsetting Bethany anymore. He would arrive home in the evening, freshen up, have his dinner in silence, and then go to bed. They still slept in separate rooms, and Daisy knew that she was slowly losing him. She couldn't have imagined it would all end up this way. A month passed, and Daisy felt that she couldn't live like this. It was sad, but it was time to throw in the towel. She would leave Nebraska, and even though she had no idea where she was going, she had enough money to take her to New York City. She couldn't leave without giving Bethany a piece of her mind, though. Albert always ran his errands just before noon, and Daisy knew he wouldn't be at the bakery then. That would be the perfect time to confront Bethany, and then she would leave. Chapter 18. "Are you happy now? You've got everything you wanted," Daisy yelled as soon as she entered the bakery to find Bethany and Cole chatting away happily. "Daisy, please calm down. What are you talking about?" Bethany said, pretending she had no idea what Daisy was on about. "You know exactly what I'm talking about. You've managed to poison my husband against me just like you'd sworn you would," Daisy went on as she began to lose her composure. "Daisy, your problems with your husband have nothing to do with me," Bethany calmly replied as she continued to feign ignorance, further infuriating Daisy. "Ma'am, please calm down. Would you like a seat?" Cole timidly asked, trying hard to defuse the situation. Daisy was so irate that he feared a fight would break out. He couldn't have that. He knew Albert was just around the corner at a friend's dry goods store, and Cole decided it was best he fetched his boss. He slowly slid out of the bakery, but Daisy's back was turned to him, and she didn't see him leave. Bethany did. "Yes, that's right, Daisy. I warned you to stay away from Albert, but you didn't listen. I see you're packed and ready to go back to where you came from," Bethany sneered, and Daisy couldn't believe she was finally admitting to what she'd done. Daisy went to slap her, but Bethany spun around, and Daisy was now facing the entrance with Bethany's back to it. "I knew you were evil," Daisy spat. "Yes, and you don't know the half of it. I ran Albert's first fiancée out of town on the morning of their wedding so I could be close to him," Bethany said. "You did what?" Daisy asked. "You heard me right. I'm the reason Rose Watkins fled town. I was never going to let her marry the man I love, and then you came from nowhere and married him. Did you think I was going to let you live with him happily ever after?" "In your dreams," she said, her voice cold and emotionless. "What did you say, Bethany?" A voice thundered from the doorway, and when Bethany turned to look, she was confronted by a furious Albert. He'd been standing at the doorway for some minutes. He'd heard as much as he needed, and he was seething with rage. Thank God Cole had found him on time. "No, Albert, listen. It's not what you think you heard," Bethany implored him as she made as if to walk towards him. He held out a hand, stopping her in her tracks. I know what I heard. How could you do this to me? I thought you were my friend, he yelled, and the venom in his voice cut through Bethany like a sharp sword. No, please listen to me, Albert. I can explain, she begged to no avail. Collect all your belongings and leave. You should also leave town if you know what's good for you, he said, his voice now calmer. I'm so sorry I didn't listen to you, Daisy. Please don't leave, Albert pleaded. Daisy was so disappointed with him that even though Bethany was now out of the picture, she didn't think she could ever trust Albert again. You took her word over mine even when I tried to explain myself. I don't know if I can come back home with you, she said, and the pain in her voice broke his heart. What had he done? I made a mistake. Please forgive me and give me another chance, he pleaded earnestly, and her heart melted. Promise you'll never doubt me again, she said. I promise, he said and pulled her into his arms. They stood holding each other and wondering how they could have thought they could live without each other. Epilogue. Daisy removed the cake from the brick oven and placed it on the table to cool. It was her husband's birthday, and she had promised to bake a special cake at home for him. Cole can easily bake a cake at the bakery and bring it home, he'd protested when she'd offered. How would that be special for your day? She had answered. You can bake one next time when you're not like this, he'd said, pointing at her protruding belly, and Daisy burst into peals of laughter. Like what? You know you're allowed to say the word? She teased him. Okay, pregnant, he said, and they both laughed. Yes, I'm 7 months pregnant, not sick. I can effortlessly bake a perfect cake, Daisy said. That's a long time being on your feet. Are you sure you'll be okay? He'd asked, and his concern for her made her love him even more. It was now 2 years later, and they were expecting their first child. After the incident at the bakery, Albert had gone out of his way to prove his love for her. The bakery was doing tremendously well, and they had gone on to employ 4 more employees. Cole had been promoted to a managerial position, and there were talks going on about opening other branches in Bellevue and Lincoln. The last they'd heard of Bethany was that she'd packed up her belongings and left town, probably to save face. As Daisy sat back to wait for her husband and their 5 employees, who were guests at his birthday party, all she could think about was how far she'd come. She imagined how proud her father would have been of her to see what a comfortable life she'd carved out for herself. She would have given anything to have shared all of this with him. Suddenly, she felt 2 sharp kicks inside her tummy. She rubbed her belly softly with a huge smile on her face, feeling convinced that it was a message from her father telling her that he was there, present with her. The end.